Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all once again to the Economic Times Phoenix CXO Summit APAC 2022. And now it is time for a super engaging and insightful one-on-one conversation with Aruna Jayanthi, Managing Director, Latin America and Canada, Capgemini, where she will be sharing tales of transformation from the leader's desk. Aruna currently heads Capgemini's business in Canada and Latin America. She is a member of the Capgemini Group Executive Committee and has held several global leadership positions in Capgemini, including CEO Capgemini India, CEO Business Services, and Head of Asia Pacific and Latin America. Aruna joined Capgemini in early 2000 and was part of the core team that initiated and set up the offshore capabilities. So the pandemic forced businesses around the globe to undergo a complete overhaul, right from the way they do business to how their organization is structured. This transformation was not easy, and not everyone was able to make it. In this one-on-one candid conversation, we will hear some tales of successful transformations from Aruna. So Aruna, thank you so much for joining us today. It is an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join this event. Thank you, Yasmin.
Thank you so much. So without any further delay, let me jump right into this conversation to learn from the leader herself. So Aruna, business transformation was an inevitable part of organizational changes in the past 2 years. Many businesses underwent structural changes, operational differences, and had to make do with experimentative models due to changes happening almost overnight. Please share your insights on how businesses had to make unprecedented end-to-end decisions in order to transform for the changing world. And how did you navigate business transformation specifically in the past 2 years?
Thanks, Yasmin. That's, what really happened is, overnight, businesses face changes on three fronts, the most critical ones. And one is their access to the customer was cut off or nearly cut off, or the way that they access the customer changed. Their access to the suppliers changed, and the way that they interacted with the employees. So on all fronts, there was change. And really what it meant is that people had to relook at how they are operating on these fronts in order to be successful in their business. If I can take some examples around that, take the customer side of it. Okay, let's take, for example, the education industry. Okay, the higher education, especially, where it is a big. If you take Australia, for example, okay, it's a big revenue earner for them. A significant contribution to the GDP comes from their universities, which are attracting international students. And overnight, that just became impossible. With the lockdowns and their ability, and of course, people went online. But the question is, students and parents started raising questions about why we're paying so much for online. What is different? I'm not sending the kid to school, to college, and then so on. So overnight, the higher education industry, not just in Australia and Canada and UK, had to really start to look at how we're engaging with our students better. What changes? So the whole model had to change. It was not just moving from classroom learning to online learning, but they had to change it in the way of method of instruction, the level of engagement with students, and so on. So fundamental transformation had to be done in that. I was talking here in Toronto to the dean of one of the universities, and she was also talking about the level of change one had to go through in the last 2 years. And it is not temporary. I think it's going to be a long-term change. I mean, I took one example, okay, but that happens in retail, it happens in manufacturing, it happened everywhere. If I have to take one example on the supply side of it, I'm sure you've heard a lot about how the supply chains are affected. The container costs have gone up 10x or 12x, to ship goods across continents. And then it becomes important that, do you really know, if I have a limited resource, do I know where it is best placed? In shop A, in shop B, or shop C, where is it? Or you could have demand and a supply mismatch if you're not careful, and it affects business. So people have had to look at their sourcing strategies and also how you're forecasting demand, how you're matching the demand and supply. I mean, I'm taking examples of where we've actually engaged with our customers and helped them through it. So I've seen the transformation, so to say, firsthand. I mean, that's more from our customer side. But if I look at our own organization in Capgemini, we looked at the last 2 years as an opportunity rather than a problem, because in every crisis there is an opportunity as well. And we've had the opportunity to really look at, for example, to look at global sourcing of talent, anytime, anywhere, and so different models. So I think different companies have approached it differently, but at the end it was all about, is there an opportunity, and how do we overcome as I said, the customer, supplier, and the employer discontinuities that have happened.
Absolutely, Aruna, very nicely put together. I think this was an event that this generation has seen for the first time ever, and nobody was prepared. It was unprecedented completely. Business models changed, operational models changed, workforce management changed. So from the top of the pyramid to the bottom of the pyramid, I think organizations had to overhaul everything. And as you said, it's all about finding that silver lining, finding that opportunity in a crisis. And interestingly, some great stories that you told us, because thankfully we've seen businesses survive. That is the story we need to tell, right? Yeah. So the great thoughts there. Thank you so much, Aruna. So Aruna, it goes without a doubt when we say that there was added pressure on leadership and senior management to have all the answers amidst business confusion and overnight transformation. Everyone looked up to leaders, not just for defining business and work, but for well-being and support as well. What added roles did leaders from all functions, according to you, had to embody for their business and workforce? And how was it different from the pre-pandemic era, if I may ask?
Yes, you're so right. You mentioned employee well-being, and I think that really came to the forefront during the pandemic. And leaders, the strong leaders, really demonstrated one big quality, which is they showed their emotional intelligence and how they dealt with people. I mean, that was absolutely at the forefront. Of course, there are many other things like, if I have to pick one, it was how adaptable to change were they, because there was unprecedented change, as you termed it. And the successful leaders really were not just the people who were willing to change, but were really at the forefront, who were driving the change, who were the harbingers of change. So I think managing that change and leading the change was one very big expectation from leaders. And the second one, as I mentioned first, was that the ones who were able to create really push forward the employee well-being, and that was the second one. Which meant it's a very broad topic, but people who were able to let's say create a trust environment of trust, who could really be authentic in their leadership styles, be able to empathize, to listen to their people. That was so critical. I'll give you just one example. I had a call with some of my women team members maybe 7 or 8 months ago, about how they're doing. And it was just a, get to know how are you doing kind of 1-hour conversation. And I mean, it all came pouring out, and they said, people just don't get it. And they're organizing calls into the middle of the night. And just because I'm at home and I'm not traveling doesn't mean that I have the time to do it. And there was this intense sense of burnout, that was there across the organization. And one part of that organization that I was talking to, and this was in Mexico, where, the macho culture and, always present, always expected culture. And that was really causing a problem. So we needed leaders who could empathize and really make these changes and take care of their employees.
That's so interesting, actually. I was reading somewhere, and the word that became the word for 2020, according to Forbes, was empathy, actually. And I think that you very rightly said, leaders who could manifest that quality, listen to their people, understand what are their needs, and then work accordingly. I think that became, because burnout actually went up this roof this time. But though people thought that people are working from home, it could be probably easier. It actually became the opposite for them. So that's a very interesting point. And and the second point that you made, that leaders had to lead the change, they had to become the harbingers. I think if leaders did not know how to change themselves first, adapt first, and then because they had to manage business, they had to manage people, there was so much there. So some great points there, Aruna. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure our audience are loving this conversation. So moving on to some business transformation challenges now. So business transformation came with its own challenges, but it also provided a clean slate for most organizations to create business models that were seamless and efficient, attuned to the different business environments. Leaders are still redefining their business models in order to make them future-proof. So according to you, Aruna, which strategies should leaders keep in mind while designing their future business models? We're talking about the future now, which is still a little uncertain, but what do you think? What could work?
Yasmin, I don't believe there's anything that I'm not too comfortable saying future proof, because future is changing constantly and you don't know what you'll expect. So, the best thing for me that an organization can do is be agile. Agility, flexibility are keywords. You need to be able to adapt to the situation. So, so the organizations needs to be light enough, nimble-footed to be able to navigate through, any circumstances or any events that come up with. However, I think there are two very, very important things that any organization today needs to keep in mind as they look to the future. Okay, number one is sustainability. Okay, it is an absolutely important topic. Organizations realize it, the customers realize it. If you look at the Gen Z, they're driving so much of behavior that is, it's important for them to see sustainability in the products. And we've done research where it shows that they're willing to pay more for sustainable products. They demand it from their, it's also there in other generations, but I think the Gen Z will be the ones that are driving this as we go forward. So organizations are looking at how can they be more, a lot of them have already made commitments around net zero. What are they doing in order to get to net zero by a certain year, as we have done. And have taken actions, is it like using green energy, reduced air travel, whatever the things are, changing their manufacturing processes in order to have more of a circular economy. So all of that, I think those are important, but not just what we do as a company, but also in terms of the products and services, as I said, for the Gen Z, which is very important. So for me, the future, if I say we have one asset to take care of, and that's the planet, and so that's a very important one as we look to the future. The second one, which is more a social side of it, is the digital inclusion side. As we increasingly become tech-oriented in the way that we do business, and technology is the backbone of nearly everything, then you start to think, hey, there are people who do not have access to that. You saw it, even with the vaccine, right? So many people were not able to log into the systems to book a vaccine appointment. And that is inequity. Okay? So I think as we design our products, as companies design their products and services, it is important to keep that frame in mind as to how we're going to create a society that's more inclusive digitally and not just create products and services for the digital haves versus the have-nots.
Great, Aruna. I do hear a lot from other leaders as well about how do they prepare for the future, and there are many aspects to it, from skilling their employees to investing more in technology and all that. But the 2 points that you mentioned are so critical here: sustainability and having that a digital inclusion for the people that you have around you. And I think, as you said, people are looking for meaningful and purposeful work, and be it their work, be it the kind of products and services they use. So sustainability is very high on priority. So yes, I think leaders and organizations need to prepare for the future by keeping those in mind. And digital inclusion, digital literacy, how do you include everybody, especially in nations which are developing and are on the verge of becoming better developed nations? I think it's going to be very, very important. So some great points how we can look at the future. Of course, it's going to be uncertain. We cannot, whatever we plan, but as you said, if you're agile and nimble, you will go with the flow of change. Yeah. So great thoughts. Thank you so much for sharing that. So the increased organizational dependency on technology, we just spoke about that also, due to the entire digital transformation that happened of businesses, it allowed for businesses to be empowered with innovation. So Aruna, what's the next step leaders must take to ensure technological innovation that it fuels business acceleration?
So tech software is at the heart of everything now. And I think it's hard to see a company which does not really include that in every aspect of their business. However, what is changing in my view is that is it just something that you use to operate more efficiently, to automate and so on? Or is it something that is changing the very business model and the nature of services that you offer? Okay, so there's a difference. So digital transformation enabled by tech has been there for a while. But I think what is changing is that you're really starting to look at new business models which are enabled by tech. To give you one or two examples, okay? So let's take, if you take the auto industry, okay? So the auto industry, the primary product you would imagine is the car, but increasingly it is projected that, they are using the concept of the connected car and there's software everywhere in the car, and then you can do so many things with it. So it is projected that by the end of this decade, 22% of the revenue of the auto companies will actually come from services, software-related services, services which are enabled by the tech behind it. Not just the car alone, not just the car as a product, but the services behind it. So you see, so technology is enabling even the traditional manufacturing companies to move more and more to a service model, and then you start to see that transition that is enabled by tech. So it's almost like looking at with the smartphone, what a revolution you got in terms of communication, the apps and all of that. You will see that kind of transformation even in some of the traditional manufacturing companies. And then, just as the example I used was a connected car. To take another one, if you look at, again, I talked about vaccine a little bit earlier, but if you look at also the life sciences companies, okay, drug discovery was a process which took decades. Okay, the R&D processes, but AI-enabled drug discovery is something which they're saying it can be 200 times faster, okay, than what it is, right? Because you have access to so much of information and are able to really check the permutations and combinations of what is possible versus a drug versus a target so much easily. So I think it's not just about, as I started the conversation with, it's not just about using tech to do things more efficiently, but really to examine as a business, how does it change the paradigm of what we're doing? And does it allow us to do things not just differently, but new things as well? Okay, that's the interesting. To add something else, which has been on my mind, which is today, data is everywhere. And I think that the real tech today, it's not just putting a piece of software or hardware somewhere, but it's also about leveraging the data that is around all of us. And I don't know how true this is, but somebody told me that there is more data than there are grains of sand on this earth, and then it's multiplying really fast, right? So the question is, how do you really not just look at tech as tech, but really look at how do you build a data-driven organization that is helping you look to the future and build the future as opposed to just use data to analyze the past.
Great points, Aruna. Thank you so much. I think I totally agree with you that technology shouldn't be used just to automate and work more efficiently, but how can it be used to fuel innovation for the future? We've seen the past 2 years, digital transformation has been the bedrock of all the transformation that has happened actually, but how do you take it forward? By innovating with it, right? So I think that's a great point. So, and data, I think everybody's torrents of data available there. How do you use data, make better use of it to make more informed decisions, maybe create better models for your people, for your future of your own business? I think that's also going to set the tone for how technology impacts a business in the future. So great point there. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, just one thing, Yasmin, something you said reminded me of that actually, it's about how you bring the physical and the digital worlds together. Okay, and that's really for our audience in Asia. I think 3D Singapore is a very good example of how that is. Creation of a digital twin to really then create a platform for multiple applications around it. So there is this whole thing around the intelligent industry, which is out there, which is bringing together the best of the digital, physical worlds in order to create a new paradigm.
Yeah, it will, in fact. So great. Thanks for sharing that, Aruna. Moving on to a final question for this session today, Aruna. So today, the workforce and workplace are continually transforming, with different organizations experimenting with different work models. Hybrid work is definitely a huge part of the future of work. And so, Aruna, share with us some insights on how leaders can further reinforce business values and enable the workforce to drive business success, and specifically in the kind of models that we are working with, in the current times.
I think a lot has been said, Yasmin, already about moving to the hybrid model and what it means for workforce management. Clearly, it is that direction. It's not going back. So organizations are looking at how to adapt, including us. So what it really means, if I look at it from a people angle, which is the most important one when we're looking at this whole topic of hybrid working model, is how do you really continue to build the engagements with the employee? That's the single question that we need to look at. What is it? They are remote, they're not seeing it, and there are fears and insecurities around, I think they call it, this goes back 20 years, I think, but the fear of missing out. Yeah, I'm not there in front of my boss. Some 3 guys are meeting, I'm not part of that meeting, I'm working remotely. So this whole fear and insecurity around what happens to me, so organizations really need to look at, no matter where an employee is, in the office or remote, how do we build that sense of trust, that the culture around, the sense of belongingness to the organization, and how do we take away their fears and insecurities around being working remotely, or feeling that, hey, I'm missing out the best opportunities. Because if we don't do that, the best guys, if they're insecure, will leave us.
Yes.
Okay? So to me, the customer engagement side is truly the most important. And this will mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier, to have the leadership focus on it. And I think in many ways, one has to relearn leadership in terms of what does it mean to manage a hybrid working force, and how do we build the same sense of loyalty and belongingness in a team that is dispersed widely.
Absolutely, very important. While people are connected to each other more than ever through technology, the human connect is something they've started missing. And I think that's also one thing that's adding to the burnout, because you're working in your one room, from one room, you're not meeting people. So I think leaders become responsible for making sure that the connections are happening, the human touch is there in some way or the other, so that people stay motivated, engaged. And yes, employee experience has been already, touted as one of the most important things that came out of the pandemic. And organizations and leaders started focusing more on it. So a great thought. And as final thoughts, Aruna, from you, before we conclude this session, I just want to hear two things from you. One would be one lesson that you learned personally as a leader during the pandemic era. And secondly, one advice you'd like to give to leaders to manage business transformations better. So over to you.
If I can combine the two, I think my answer would be more or less similar. It is that I think one personal lesson I've learned is around communication. There can never be less of it. So, connect with people, communicate. That is so much important, so very important during these times, and not just these times, but it was always important, but it's just catapulted to the top for me personally in terms of what it means. And that's the same advice I would give to everybody else. You can have your great business models, you can drive the change, you can do everything, but you need to communicate to people and take the people along with you.
That's beautiful. I totally agree with you. I think that's what authentic leadership is all about. So thanks for sharing that, Aruna. I think it was a beautiful conversation. We learned so much about how, how leaders need to drive the change, how leaders, organizations need to become agile and nimble, how sustainability and agility and social impact are going to be important in the future, and how at the end of it, technology and people will be the core focus of how businesses transform and continue transforming for the future. So much to learn from you, Aruna, as always. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Yasmin. It's been a pleasure.
It was absolutely same here, Aruna. So thank you so much once again, everyone, for joining us. Stay tuned for more such engaging sessions all through the day today. And do keep engaging in the comment section, as we have some interesting prizes for you as well. Coming up next is an exclusive one-on-one interaction with Michelle Wooker, best-selling author of The Grey Rhino, which will be moderated by Nadia Tan Abdullah, CHRO of SP Setia Berhad. So do join us there, and thank you once again, everyone.